Okay, this is the second part of the lecture talking about the contributions of President Washington had on our uh, new government. President Washington is elected as the first president underneath the new Constitution in 1792, and he'll serve 2 terms. Washington, one of the biggest things that Washington is in charge of is he's the first for everything. And that means he's going to set precedents. And precedents means that you're the one that's going to give a clear definition of the direction that you're going to be going as a company or as a team when you want to set the right tone. So Washington has got a uh, dilemma that he is in charge of a country that has a government that has never been used before, a republic, people having the power. So he wants to be seen as the people's leader. He doesn't want to be seen as a king or a dictator. So he's going to say, I need to be referred to in a respectful manner, but not so much as that people think I'm a king. And so, as the leader of the Continental Army, he will demand that people call him His Excellency. But when he becomes the leader of the executive branch, uh, he doesn't want to use that title. It again refers to a king or a monarch. And so he says somebody had given him the suggestion that in other governments, when someone's a leader of something, they call him the president. So that's what he said he wanted to be. He's going to be the president. One of the other precedents that Washington does is through the Judiciary Act of 1789, they set up 3 cabinet positions to help advise him. He's going to expand that cabinet by another 3. And this cabinet is going to advise him on issues and protocol and direction, and then they're going to together propose new legislation to Congress. That has been the role of the president all the way up until today. In addition, Washington will give the annual State of the Union address that he will go every year before Congress and say how he perceives the nation is doing. Washington will set this, and it will last until Jefferson, and then Jefferson will move away from the State of the Union. It will be picked up again, though, by Woodrow Wilson, the president of the United States in 1914, again elected in 1918. I think it gets brought back in during Woodrow Wilson's second term. I believe it's 1918 that he brings it back in, and since 1918, for 102 years now, the president comes before Congress every year and gives his State of the Union address. Um, One of the things that the president of the Articles of Confederation, they felt was a deficiency of it, is that the president was being interrupted and he never had a clear, concise schedule. Washington is going to set the precedents for how presidents are to be visited and how they are to run their day. So each president does it differently. President Trump supposedly is someone who wakes up very, very early and does a lot of different things, and then we'll start meeting with his cabinet and his advisors somewhere around 11 o'clock, anywhere from 11 to 1. Um, President Obama, I think, was different, was more conventional. He was a 8 o'clock guy, come in, start working, get his daily schedule plan put in place, and then meet with advisors, meet with cabinet, national security. And then that evening, typically, or that afternoon, you will have the president invite somebody, a business leader, um, somebody of influence, and he will sit and visit with them, sometimes inviting members of his cabinet or his political staff to sit down and have dinner with them to discuss what that person had to bring to the president's attention. One of the biggest ones that Washington chose to do, and he'll address this in his farewell speech, is Washington will choose, right on the heels of the American Revolution, about 20 years later, 15 years later, you have the French Revolution. And the French Revolution models itself off after the American Revolution. It's a much more bloody affair where the revolutionaries will seize the power of the control of the government. They'll behead King Louis and a bunch of the members of parliament. You have 2 factions underneath Washington's administration. Hamilton, who is the Federalist, who says we should be backing England. England is our biggest trading partner, and so let's stay with them. You have Jefferson, who is telling him, my gosh, you have to go with the people of France because the people of France backed us in our revolutionary endeavors. And Washington will choose to stay neutral. And that choice of staying neutral will be a policy that the United States will use for the better part of from 1792 until 1945. So whatever you want to look and see that 1800, that's about 155, 160 years that America stayed completely out of foreign affairs. Now, today we're not that way. We are around the world. We've got our forces everywhere. But we're also no longer the little kid on the block like we were when we became a nation. So that was a gigantic precedent that he set of staying neutral in foreign affairs. Finally, Washington's actions during the Whiskey Rebellion. Remember, the Whiskey Rebellion was a little bit like Shays' Rebellion. A group of farmers are mad because they're having to pay a tax. The Shays' Rebellion was sparked out of the states being required to pay back the national debt for the war against England in the Revolutionary War. When we chuck the Articles of Confederation, we rewrite it, we're going to find that the national government's going to say, no, we're going to take on the responsibility of paying back the debt, and we're going to pass what we call a tax, and it's going to be what we call today a sin tax. We're going to put it on an item like whiskey, and anybody who makes whiskey's got to pay this tax, and that's going to help pay off this debt we have for the war. Some of the farmers who were planting corn are very much opposed to this in the Appalachian region, and Washington will send, I believe it's 13,000 troops, 15,000 troops, and say, farmers, you're going to pay the tax, or we're going to smash and destroy and put you in jail. Farmers went along with it. Two things that were put in place from that. One, the new national government, central government, is much stronger than the previous Articles of Confederation national government. And two, federal law, when it's express power. Express power, again, is something that is written in the Constitution. The Constitution says Congress has the power to tax its citizens, that the federal power trumps state power. And that precedent's been set ever since Washington's reaction on Whiskey's Rebellion. Finally, let's take a look at President Washington in 1796 says, I've had enough. I'm going to get out. Washington was our commander-in-chief of the colonial army, Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, and I think he was content to retire and go back to his estate in, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden, upstate Virginia. Where was his place? Anyway, I should know that, and I forget it. But he was talked into running as president. In his second term, he didn't want to do it. He felt like he was getting attacked by a bunch of people, and he was talked into it by both his Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury. And by the third time, though, he says, I'm done. And then one of the reasons why he says I need to be done is I don't want to die in office, because if I die in office, that leaves the precedence that I'm actually a king again. And I do not want that image to be the case. So he will step out of being the president after 2 terms. A 2-term president is going to be the mandate, the precedent, all the way up until Great Depression and World War II with Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt was the only president to serve more than 2 terms. He was elected to 4 terms, and after his death in 1945, we're going to have the 25th Amendment passed, which states the president can be only elected to 2 terms. He can serve up to 10 years, 2 years of him being a vice president, and then if the president he was serving died or was removed, he could serve the last 2 years of his administration, and then he could be elected to 2 terms of his own, which would make a total of 10 years. But Washington set that in place. And Washington's going to say one of the big things that he believes in is that the unity and the national image of the country oversees any other partisan or any other particular issue. We never forsake the unity of our country. So he would have been on the side of Abraham Lincoln wholeheartedly in the dispute over slavery. You're mad, you're upset, we understand, I get it, but the union of the country comes over the division of the country over slavery. So that is something that Washington wants to relay to the nation and to everyone in his farewell speech. Washington warns three things when he's going to leave office. And it's amazing. This was what, 240 years ago? And let's take a look at this. The first one was don't let regional conflicts, don't let regionalism, don't let your pride in being from the Northwest or from the South or from the North or wherever that region is, overseed your pride to being an American. Well, stop for a second. What was the Civil War fought over? It was fought over regionalism, South versus the North. And you can say, well, it's fought over slavery, but slavery was in the South and not in the North. So regionalism was an enormous problem for our country. Not as much today, but it's still there. You still have images of that. Partisanship. Partisanship is taking interest in a particular issue or topic, and again, having that oversee the unity of the country. So I am pro-choice, and I don't care about anything else, but my guy I'm going to back is going to be pro-choice, or I'm pro-life. And I don't care what his stance is for American involvement in foreign country affairs. I want him to believe in, the sanctity of life. And so, or I'm pro-environment, and I believe that we need to cut our carbon footprint, and that oversees everything else. Or I'm an evangelical Christian who believes in the unity of the family, and that oversees anything else, the Constitution and all that. And Washington said, don't let those partisanships, don't let those issues, don't let ties between parties and that pull you away from being an American. You're an American first. And last but not least was his foreign entitlements. And the foreign entitlements is don't get caught up in foreign affairs and let that drag you into a war. I'm going to ask you: Are we in a lot of different places in the world today? And obviously, the answer is yes, we are. And are we involved in China and what they do? Yes, we are. Are we involved in Europe and what goes on in Europe? Yes, we do. Are we involved with what goes on in Asia? Absolutely. Japan, Korea. Are we adamantly up to date with what's going on in the Suez Canal? You bet we are. And the reason we probably come back and say that is we're no longer the 105-pound weakling that we were when we became a nation. We're the big boy on the block, and we need to do that. The argument against that, not getting involved in foreign entanglements, is World War II, where we have our head in the sand and we're being isolationists, and you allow somebody like Hitler to come to power and darn near take over all of Europe, which would have, quite likely changed our country dramatically. So who's right? I don't know, but that was Washington, very much afraid of foreign entanglements. I put this in as the last thing. He regarded the press as a disuniting, diabolical force of falsehoods. These are sentiments that he expressed in his farewell address. Now, who else makes statements about the press like that? Let's think for a second. I always tend to think of Mr. Washington as this guy that had a halo over him or a light that was always shining upon him. But he himself was saying, you know what? I don't trust the press. They're always trying to cause division. They're diabolical. That sounds a lot like that guy that always points in the back of the room and says, those guys are a bunch of fake news people, and all they do is write lies about me. So the more things change, the more things stay the same. Mr. Trump and Mr. Washington did have some things in common. All right, there you have it. We'll talk later.